Always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
Kakvi su odnosi Nizozemske i Bosne i Hercegovine? Šta misli o sigurnosnoj situaciji u regionu? Kako gleda na rusku invaziju Ukrajine i na odnose unutar NATO saveza? Gost emisije Recite Al Jazeeri je ambasador Kraljevine Nizozemske Henk van den Dool. Now, Mr. Ambassador, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, the Netherlands and Bosnia have quite a history of diplomatic relations. Now, in your own words, you've been here for a bit, I guess, more than a year or so.
Almost.
What kind of a role do you see the Netherlands as having in this country, in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Thank you for that question, and let me thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. I've been here for almost a year now. And I think we like to see ourselves as a good friend of this country, as a close friend of this country, and I think Bosnia-Herzegovina agrees with that view. Bilateral relations are excellent at the moment. We have had a visit of our Prime Minister in January. Chairman of the Presidency, Dr. Bečirović, visited The Hague officially a few weeks ago and was received by His Majesty the King as well. We are active in EU4, we are active in economy. I think we are a reliable partner when it comes to the European path of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So that is the role. We are not the biggest player in this country.
Right.
We are definitely not a small player. But I think we're Dutch, so we are direct but also predictable. And I think that is appreciated, and this is the role we like to play. And actually, when I look the other way around, Bosnia in the Netherlands, it is in a way it is similar. There's a large Bosnian diaspora in the Netherlands, very well integrated, at the same time also very visible and very vocal. And they are incredibly appreciated in all walks of life, in commerce, in industry, in academia. So I think we are good friends.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Ambassador, let me narrow down this question. So, can you elaborate on the current state of bilateral relations between Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Kingdom of the Netherlands, particularly in the context of Bosnia's recent green light towards the opening of accession talks with the EU?
Yeah, well, that is a relevant question, and that question could be expected, obviously, because somehow in the media in this country the image is given as if the Netherlands is so extremely critical about the EU prospect of this country, and we're being so difficult. And
but it's not.
No, it is not. Actually, when I say we are good friends, I also meant we are good friends on this Euro-Atlantic path of this country. We want to encourage this country on the road to Brussels. That is why we agreed with the green light. At the same time, we have always had the position that goes for Bosnia, but also goes for the other candidate countries. We have always held the position that there are certain criteria and conditions to be met. It is a story about real reform, because being a member state of the European Union is like playing in the Champions League. And you have to be a good player in order to be able to play in the Champions League. It is not a gift. So as far as we are concerned, this green light, which was given in March by the European Council, is perhaps not that much because of reforms that have already been implemented, but it is to encourage Bosnia-Herzegovina, politicians, but mainly the population, to encourage the country to go ahead on this path. And I think when we are able to, well, like this interview, for example, when we are able to talk a bit longer to people here and explain that, actually we're not only strict, but we're also fair, as we like to say, fair and engaged. We're giving a lot of assistance to this country, technical assistance. We organize courses, we organize exchanges. We are always there to help. all on the understanding that certain reforms have to be made in order for Bosnia-Herzegovina to be able to take the next step. Now, the next step, as you know, is agreement on the negotiation framework. There as well, a number of these conditions and criteria will be mentioned and have to be met. There has to be a coordination mechanism on the Bosnian side in order to work on all the reforms necessary. And along the whole way, we are there to provide assistance and to provide help.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you perceive the evolving geopolitical dynamics and the geopolitical landscape in the Balkans, with examples of quite serious and worrisome democratic backsliding in our region?
Yeah, well, absolutely, that's worrisome. It relates in a way to the previous question. When countries are moving towards the European Union, it's not only Bosnia, obviously, it's also the other candidate countries in the region. And actually all of them, because as you know, apart from Kosovo, for very specific reasons, all the countries in the region are candidate member states and are on the road to Brussels. At the same time, we are seeing democratic backsliding here, as with some of the neighbors. When you look at international rankings, for example, the Freedom House Index or the Reporters Without Borders Index about media freedom, you see that actually none of the countries in this region is doing particularly well or is improving over the past years. On this the Media Freedom Index that I mentioned, Bosnia, I think this year slipped almost 20 places to 81st place in the worldwide ranking. Now that is not promising. That is not promising. That means that we as international community, we should step up our efforts, obviously, to work on improving the state of democratic institutions and democratic freedoms. But it is worrisome, and it as often things do not happen in isolation. This is undoubtedly related to the changing geopolitical situation in Europe as a whole. Where we are confronted with a unjust, aggressive war in Ukraine, which obviously changes the mood and the vibe and the atmosphere also in this part of Europe. We see upflaring again of ethno-religious nationalism in Bosnia, not only in Bosnia, but also in Bosnia. We see some politicians in this country and also in other countries who apparently feel that they should make their own choices, regardless of their European ambitions, and visit newfound friends in Minsk or in Moscow. This is all extremely worrying. This is all extremely worrying, and it runs counter to the professed European ambition, and I may even say Euro-Atlantic ambition, because, as you know, in Bosnia, membership of NATO officially is still a strategic goal.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you talk about all these different challenges, do you see red flags popping up in this region?
Well, it is always difficult to recognize red flags. Afterwards, it's easy, but to predict what is a red flag is difficult. I must say, well, I just mentioned visits to Moscow or to Minsk. That is at least a dark orange flag, I would say. Mm-hmm. We are still analyzing what exactly happened during the All-Serbian assembly that took place in Belgrade a few weeks ago. I just mentioned ethno-religious nationalism. Mm-hmm.
So definitely something that needs to be looked at closely and analyzed, right?
Absolutely.
Now, Mr. Ambassador, allow me to ask you a question that concerns more, European security and the European security architecture as a whole. So, given the rising security concerns in Europe, and particularly, as you mentioned, the rising nationalistic movements in the far right, what strategies does the Netherlands advocate for bolstering regional stability and security in this part of the world, in the Western Balkans?
In this part of the world, I think our strategy is very, very clear. It is promoting the Euro-Atlantic integration of the countries, not only Bosnia and Herzegovina, but all the countries in the region. Some of them have already joined NATO, as you are well aware. All of them, with the exception of Kosovo, are candidate member states of the Union. I think that should be the goal, and we should work hard on that. Now, and at the same time, in the meantime, we should be very alert, as you phrase it yourself, very alert that stability is not threatened on the road to Brussels. For that reason, for example, I think the continued presence of EUFOR Althea is important, and of KFOR in Kosovo. And these are joint military undertakings in which the Netherlands participates quite strongly. But the ultimate goal is obviously that we don't need that anymore, and that integration into the structures is a fact.
Right. Now let's move on to, of course, the war in Ukraine, which you just mentioned a while ago. So in what ways has this ongoing conflict in Ukraine reshaped the European Union's foreign policy and security paradigm, and how is the Netherlands contributing to this new framework?
Well, I think the fact that the Russian Federation actually invaded Ukraine, which was, many people believed this would not be the case. I very well remember that period. But the fact that it really happened, even after Crimea, etc., because signs were there.
2014, right?
That was in 2014. But I think it brought the message home to European capitals, including The Hague, that ultimately we have to rely on our own defense mechanisms as European countries. We cannot be complacent and think, as Francis Fukuyama said in '92, that history is over. History is not over. We have to be prepared for the worst things happening. We cannot necessarily always trust on the American security umbrella. That is, of course, the message that came out of the previous U.S. administration. So the security paradigm in Europe, I would say, is changed in such a way that we have to take our own responsibility here, and we cannot allow Ukraine to lose. Therefore, support is massive, as you know, and that will be ongoing. Support is massive from the United States, but also from Europe, and actually on a bilateral basis, and seen relatively to size, etc. I think the Netherlands is one of the largest supporters to the war effort in Ukraine, and that has to continue. It takes what it takes, and it's not over before it's over, because the war of aggression is of course, catastrophic for Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. But apart from that, it's also a direct threat to our way of thinking, our set of values, our liberal democracy in Europe.
Right. We have seen quite some remarkable comments coming from Admiral Rob Bauer, who heads the NATO's military committee, from General Cavoli, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, saying that Europe and NATO should be ready for some sort of conflict with Russia. Quite very serious comments coming from top-notch officials. We have seen a huge change in a huge reorientation when it comes to the European defense sector, mass productions of ammunition and armaments, and so on and so forth. So would you say that the war in Ukraine Russia's invasion of Ukraine has, in a way, reinvigorated NATO as a military alliance.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It has reinvigorated NATO. It has increased the need to keep all the allies looking in the same direction, which is not always easy. As you know, statistics show now that most, not yet all, but most European countries are actually pulling their weight and devoting more than 2% of their GDP to the defense budget.
Which wasn't the case before the war.
Definitely wasn't the case, and I must admit that also for the Netherlands this was not the case, but now it is. So yes, NATO is reinvigorated. The other side of that is that also the EU is reinvigorated, and that actually, whereas there are many good reasons for countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina to join the European Union, since Ukraine, I think security is an extra reason. Bosnian security on the Balkans, but also our own security. And traditionally, that is not part of the EU institution, because we have NATO for that.
Right. But it's increasingly becoming a very important pillar.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right. But would you say now that European EU member states are all pretty much on the same page when it comes to the common threat perception coming from the East? With minor exceptions?
With minor exceptions, yeah. That's how I would phrase it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, obviously, is that we do realize now, and we did not realize that. At least I didn't realize, and many people did not realize that 2.5 years ago. We do realize that there is a high degree of unpredictability and irrationality in things that are happening and actions taken, in this case, by the Kremlin. So even though your analysis may be like certain steps are likely and other ones are not, there is this degree of unpredictability which you have to factor in.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming back to our region again, and our two countries, can you discuss the key areas of economic cooperation between Bosnia and the Kingdom of the Netherlands? And what future opportunities do you see when it comes to enhancing trade, enhancing investment, enhancing military cooperation, security cooperation, and technological exchange, which it's very important at this stage in order to counter cyber attacks and to enhance these regions and these countries' cybersecurity capabilities?
Yeah. Well, let me start with the current status of our economic and trade relations. It's good. It's growing. It's flourishing. We are one of the, as in many countries, one of the larger sources of FDI, foreign direct investment.
Right.
We are, I think, if you don't count the immediate neighbors of Bosnia, which is logical, but apart from that, we're one of the bigger trade partners in volume. But things can always be improved. The interesting thing I just mentioned, there is a large Bosnian diaspora in the Netherlands. It's more than 60,000 individuals. Most of them came to the Netherlands in the 90s. And many of them as children, they came with their parents, and these children grew up and were educated in the Netherlands. And many of them are coming back now, commercially or as entrepreneurs, to invest in this country and to build their future and the future for their children as well in this country. And that gives so much hope, because on the other side we know that many young people are leaving this country. So it makes me incredibly optimistic to see that people are coming back. And obviously they start businesses here or joint ventures in many different sectors, agro-food, water, IT, furniture. The chair on which you're sitting is Dutch designed but produced by a Dutch company in Bosnia.
In Bosnia, right?
And that is really good to see that. And having been trained in the Netherlands, having had their education in the Netherlands and their first experiences in the Netherlands, these companies often come with a lot of innovation, safe and sound labor practices, sustainability programs, corporate social responsibility, you name it, innovation, a lot of innovation.
Which the region lacks anyways. Already.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it is, although the overall volume is well, we're not the largest one, but it is, I think it's very useful for Bosnia.
Right. Finally, I wanted to ask you, I know that the Netherlands has a profound history regarding Holocaust remembrance. How does this historical consciousness inform your country's approach to reconciliation and transitional justice in post-genocide societies such as Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Yeah, well, there you have me. Apart from being a diplomat, I'm also a historian. And I very strongly believe that if you're not able to look history straight into the eye, to come to terms with history, you will never be able to successfully work on the present or on the future. That is true everywhere, but it is especially true in this part of the world. And I must say, I find it difficult to accept that the attention with young people, with academia, with media as well, with politicians, the attention for what happened in the 90s and what should have followed after that, transitional justice, remembrance, memorialization, and then in the end reconciliation. Attendance is dramatically decreasing. I've been working on these issues for the last 10-15 years, and I remember that 10-15 years this was transitional justice, this sort of issue, that was still the top issue.
It was indeed.
And not anymore. People somehow feel that it's time to move on now. But against the backdrop of what I just said, you cannot successfully work on the future without being able to look the past straight into the eye. Certain steps still have to be made. You know, the Netherlands is one of the very few, perhaps the only country in the world that has written respect for and promotion of international law in its constitution. That is why The Hague is called the International Capital of Justice. We have the ICJ, we have the ICC, we were home to ICTY, and now MICT. We are home to the specialist chambers for Kosovo, and this is all not for nothing. I think that we, as the Netherlands, we have a special responsibility to keep focusing on issues of remembrance and memorialization and reconciliation. And that is obviously even apart from our own particular history with Srebrenica, which adds, of course, to this issue. But I think that is also the reason why we are so happy with the resolution which was passed by the General Assembly on Srebrenica recently. We supported that wholeheartedly, and to be honest, it was about time. But it's also the reason that I, as a professional diplomat, but also as a person on a personal level, on an emotional or human level, if you like, I find it painful actually to watch how genocide denial, war crimes denial, glorification of convicted war criminals, how that is on the rise again, and especially how politicians, not only in Bosnia, it happens as well in Serbia, it happens in Croatia, how politicians somehow create the enabling environment, if you like, in which these sort of utterances are deemed to be acceptable. I find it painful, I find it offensive, I find it insulting, and actually I find that it touches very basic concepts of humanity and of morality.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, it was such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be